I never imagined my life turning into something that felt like a script ripped straight from a twisted drama, but reality has a way of outdoing fiction. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own mother, I would have laughed in their face. Yet, here I am, recounting the kind of story no one ever wants to live through. To start, let me give you a little context. My name is Rachel, I'm 20 years old, and I live with my boyfriend Alex. We've been together for a couple of years now, and things between us are solid, which is something I can't say for my family. Alex and I rent a small house, one of those tiny homes that look cute on Pinterest but in reality barely have enough space for two people. Still, it's ours and we make it work. The problem isn't the size of our home, it's who lives next door. That's where my uncle and aunt come in. Well, more specifically, my cousin Jake. Jake is 42 years old, and for the last 13 years, he hasn't been part of anyone's life. He was locked up, serving a sentence for a crime so disturbing that no one in the family liked to talk about it. Child molestation. The kind of crime that makes your stomach twist, the kind that makes your skin crawl just hearing about it. And yet, despite the severity of his past, here he was, free, living right next to me, and somehow, back in my mother's good graces. Before Jake was released, my mom wasn't exactly a present figure in my life. She had always been distant, preoccupied with her own world. When she did visit, it was sporadic, rushed, and usually left me feeling like an afterthought. But after Jake came home, something changed. She started showing up every weekend, smiling, laughing, and, what made my stomach turn, dressed up like she was going on a date. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just trying to feel good about herself. Maybe she was bored. But then I started noticing the little things. The way she laughed at his jokes a little too hard, the way she found reasons to be near him, the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. It made me uneasy, but what could I say? Hey, Mom, why are you acting like a schoolgirl with a man who literally just got out of prison for preying on children? It sounded insane, even in my head. Then my dad started noticing it too. One night, we were all sitting around, playing cards, me, Alex, my mom, Jake, and a few others. It should have been a normal, casual night, but I could feel the tension in the air. My mom was sitting a little too close to Jake. She kept touching his arm when she laughed. And then there was Jake himself, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. My phone vibrated in my lap. It was a message from my dad. "Dad, is your mom alone with Jake?" I glanced up at the table. At that moment, she wasn't. Alex and the others were still there, so I replied, keeping it short. "Me, no." But the fact that my dad had even asked meant that he was already suspicious. And if he was suspicious, then I knew I wasn't just imagining things. Still, I didn't want to believe it. This was my mother, after all. Surely she wouldn't, not again. See, my mom had a history. This wouldn't have been the first time she betrayed my father, the first time she destroyed our family over some fleeting infatuation. But after everything she had put us through before, I thought she had changed. I thought she had learned her lesson. I thought wrong. The real confirmation came the next weekend. I had just fallen asleep when my phone rang, jolting me awake. It was my dad. His voice was different this time, shaken, raw. "Did you know your mom has been messing around with Jake?" I sat up so fast my head spun. "What? No, that's not." "I have proof, Rachel. She's been lying. I just need to know if you've seen anything." I opened my mouth, ready to defend her, to deny what I already knew deep down. But then the memories started flooding in, her showing up more often, the way she lingered around him, her always finding excuses to be near him. It wasn't just in my head. It had been happening right in front of me the entire time. I swallowed hard. I don't know, but I've noticed things. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my dad spoke again, his voice was hollow. "She's been lying to me, Rachel. She's choosing him." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Because in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach churn. She wasn't just lying to my dad. She was lying to all of us. I need to stop here for now. This is just the beginning, and already I feel like my world is unraveling. But if you think this is where the worst of it ends, you'd be wrong. Because this was only the start of something so much bigger, so much more devastating. And I had no idea just how bad it was about to get. After that phone call with my dad, sleep was impossible. My mind wouldn't stop racing. The idea that my mother, my own mother, could betray us like this was too much to process. I kept staring at my phone, hoping for a follow-up message, something that would clarify this all as some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. The pit in my stomach wasn't lying to me. I spent the next morning in a daze, barely touching my coffee, barely acknowledging Alex's attempts to get me to talk. He knew something was wrong, of course, he did. I wasn't exactly good at hiding things. But how was I supposed to put this into words? Hey, babe, my mom might be sleeping with my cousin who just got out of prison for something unspeakable. That wasn't exactly breakfast conversation. By the afternoon, I had made up my mind. I needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. I pulled up to my dad's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The last time I'd been here, things had felt normal, or as normal as they ever were. Now, everything felt off. I stepped inside, and my dad was already waiting for me in the living room. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. "I have proof," he said without preamble. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Show me." He pulled out his phone and opened his messages. And there it was, the confirmation I never wanted. Text after text, my mother and Jake exchanging messages that went far beyond anything friendly. Flirty messages, secret meeting times, even references to conversations they had in person that my dad hadn't known about. I felt sick, the kind of sick that starts in your gut and spreads through your entire body, making your hands shake and your breath come short. "She lied to me, Rachel," my dad said, his voice hollow. "She promised she wouldn't see him, and yet here we are." My head was spinning. Does she even know you have these? He shook his head. "Not yet, but she will." I could hear the anger in his voice, the kind that's been simmering for too long and is about to boil over. And honestly, I didn't blame him, because I was angry too. Angry that she had done this. Angry that she had lied. Angry that she was choosing him over us. And for what? A man who had spent over a decade in prison. A man who shouldn't even be allowed near a family home. I wanted to scream, but instead I just sat there, gripping the couch so hard my fingers ached. "What do we do?" I finally asked. My dad exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "We confront her." I didn't think I'd be able to stomach facing her so soon, but the moment I left my dad's house, I found myself driving straight to her apartment. I needed to hear it from her mouth. I needed to look her in the eyes and see if she'd even try to deny it. She opened the door with a surprised look on her face, as if she hadn't been expecting me. "Rachel, what are you doing here?" I pushed past her and stepped inside before she could make an excuse. "Cut the act, Mom, I know." She blinked. "Know what?" I turned to face her, my jaw clenched. "You and Jake." Her expression faltered, just for a split second, just long enough for me to see the truth, and then she tried to mask it. "Rachel, you're being ridiculous." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Dad has proof, texts, messages, everything." She swallowed, her face going pale. It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like what I think." Silence. And then, the moment that changed everything. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She sighed, crossed her arms, and said, "I didn't want you to find out this way." That was it. That was all she had to say. Not "I'm sorry," not "I made a mistake," not even "I didn't mean to hurt you." Just a cold, matter-of-fact confession that, yes, she had been sneaking around with Jake. And no, she wasn't going to pretend she regretted it. I felt my heart shatter in that moment, but more than that, I felt something inside me go cold. She had chosen him. And if that was the case, then I was done choosing her. I don't remember leaving my mother's apartment. I must have walked out, but my brain had switched to autopilot, my feet carrying me away while my mind tried to process everything that had just happened. The whole world felt like it had tilted on its axis, and I was left dangling, unsure of where the ground was anymore. I had expected guilt. I had expected excuses, maybe even tears. But what I hadn't expected was her complete lack of remorse. The way she had just shrugged it off, as if her choices hadn't just torn apart the fragile remains of our family. That moment replayed over and over in my head, each time making my stomach twist tighter. When I finally came back to reality, I realized I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store. I had no memory of driving there. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. "Dad." I hesitated before answering. What was I supposed to tell him? That she had admitted everything without even the slightest attempt to fight for us. That she had accepted the accusation like it was nothing. I took a deep breath and picked up. "Rachel." His voice was rough, like he had been yelling or crying. Maybe both. I swallowed hard. "Yeah." "Did you talk to her?" I nodded, then realized he couldn't see me. "Yeah." Silence then, and "She didn't deny it." I exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. "She didn't even try to lie." More silence, this time heavier. "She's really choosing him, isn't she?" His voice cracked, and that nearly broke me. My dad had always been the strongest person I knew, the one who held everything together. Hearing him sound so defeated, so utterly lost, was like having my heart ripped out of my chest. "Yeah, Dad," I whispered, "she is." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, every conversation, every moment that had led us here. I thought about my childhood, about how my mom used to tuck me in at night, about the way she had always smelled like vanilla and lavender. I thought about the birthday parties, the Christmas mornings, the times she had made me soup when I was sick. And then I thought about now, about her choosing a man who had spent over a decade in prison over her own family, over me. I felt like I was grieving someone who was still alive. The next morning, I woke up to another call from my dad. "She came by the house last night," he said, his voice tight. I sat up, instantly alert. "What? Why?" "She wanted to talk. Said she needed to get some of her things, but I could tell that wasn't the real reason." My stomach twisted. "What did she say?" "That she still loves me, that she didn't mean to hurt anyone, that she just needed time to figure things out." His voice dripped with bitterness. "As if there's anything left to figure out." I squeezed my eyes shut. "Did she say anything about Jake?" "She said she was sure about him." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "But you know what I think? I think she's just keeping her options open. She knows she can't have both, so she's waiting to see which side she should fully commit to." My blood ran cold. That sounded exactly like her. I rubbed my temples. "What did you say?" "I told her to leave." His voice was final. "I told her that if she couldn't see what she was throwing away, then I wasn't going to stand around and wait for her to wake up." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Dad." "It's not your fault, Rachel," he sighed. "But I think it's time we accept the truth. She made her choice. Now we have to make ours." The following days were a blur. My mother didn't reach out. My dad kept himself busy, pretending like he was fine. But I could see it in his eyes, he was, and neither was I. I avoided places where I thought I might run into her. I ignored mutual family members who kept calling to say she was confused and going through a lot. I didn't care, because the reality was she wasn't confused. She was selfish, and I was done making excuses for her. Then, one evening, my phone lit up with a text. "Mom, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. And for the first time in my life, I ignored her. She had chosen, and now so had I. Ignoring my mother's text didn't bring me the relief I thought it would. If anything, it made the weight in my chest even heavier. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, half expecting her to follow up with another message, a call, anything, but nothing came. Maybe that should have told me everything I needed to know. Maybe it should have been proof enough that I wasn't worth fighting for in her eyes. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next day, I woke up to another message. "Mom, Rachel, please, just talk to me. I know you're angry, but I need you to understand." Understand? What exactly did she expect me to understand? That she had completely destroyed our family for a man who shouldn't even be a free citizen? That she had betrayed my father, my brother, and me without so much as a second thought? That she had stood in front of me, admitted to it all, and hadn't even looked like she regretted it? I tossed my phone onto my nightstand, rubbing my temples. I didn't want to deal with this. Not now, not ever. But ignoring her forever wasn't realistic. I needed to set my boundaries. I needed to make it clear that, for the first time in my life, she wasn't going to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. I grabbed my phone, and before I could second-guess myself, I typed out a response. Me, there's nothing to talk about. You made your choice, and I've made mine. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. Now I don't either. Don't contact me again. I hesitated for only a second before hitting send. Then, I turned my phone off and threw it into my dresser drawer, burying it under a pile of clothes as if that would somehow bury the ache in my chest, too. Days passed, and I kept waiting for the pain to dull. I kept waiting to wake up one morning and not think about it, but instead, it festered, raw and unhealed. My dad was trying to move on. He poured himself into work, into fixing things around the house that had gone neglected for years. My brother and I helped when we could, but we all knew the truth. We were just keeping busy, filling the silence so we didn't have to sit with the reality of what had happened. Then, out of nowhere, my aunt called. "Rachel, I don't know if I should even be telling you this," she said hesitantly, "but your mother, she's still seeing him, and it's worse than you think." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "She's moved in with him." I felt my stomach drop. "You're kidding." I wish I was, but that's not all. She's been telling people that your dad was controlling, that he never appreciated her, and that Jake, she hesitated, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the words, that Jake is the only person who has ever really understood her. My breath caught in my throat. Was she really trying to rewrite history? Was she actually trying to paint herself as the victim in all of this? Something inside me snapped. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was furious. That night, I drove to my dad's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When I stepped inside, he looked up from the kitchen table where he had been nursing a cup of coffee, his face drawn and tired. "She moved in with him," I said without preamble. "Did you know?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah, I heard. And she's telling people you were controlling, that you never appreciated her. That Jake is her savior or some bullshit like that." A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he didn't say anything. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. We can't just let her do this. We can't let her act like she's the victim here. "What do you want me to do, Rachel?" His voice was quiet but firm. "Go around correcting every lie she tells. Let her drag me into a public fight that I don't want to be a part of." I clenched my fists. "So we just let her get away with it?" "No," he said simply. "We move on, we live our lives, and we don't let her have any more space in our heads than she already has." I wanted to argue, I wanted to scream, but deep down, I knew he was right. And that realization hurt more than anything. That night, I sat in my car outside my dad's house for a long time before driving home. I thought about all the things I wanted to say to her, all the things I knew I never would. And then, for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Because no matter how strong I pretended to be, no matter how many times I told myself I was done with her, the truth was simple. She was still my mother. And losing her, really losing her, felt like a hole I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to fill. Time didn't stop, even though it felt like it should have. The days continued to pass, indifferent to the wreckage my mother had left behind. The sky still darkened at night, and the sun still rose in the morning, even though my world felt dimmer. I kept telling myself that I was done with her, that I had drawn my line in the sand and refused to step back over it. And for a while, I managed to believe it. But the truth was, she wasn't as easy to shake as I wanted her to be. I had just finished a long shift at work when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting my dad or my brother, maybe Alex, checking in. But when I saw the name flashing across the screen, I froze. "Mom!" A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part, the part of me that still ached for the mother I used to know, made my fingers move before my brain could stop them. I pressed the answer button. "Hello?" For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then a breath. "Rachel," her voice was softer than I expected, almost hesitant. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." I closed my eyes, gripping the steering wheel. "Yeah, well, I almost didn't." She exhaled, and I could hear the emotion in it. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. It was like she expected me to do the heavy lifting, to fill the silence with words that made this easier for her. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. "Why are you calling, Mom?" I finally asked, my voice flat. She hesitated. I miss you." I clenched my jaw. "Missed me?" She missed me like a person misses an old habit they outgrew, not like a mother missing her child. If she truly missed me, she wouldn't have chosen him. "You made your choice," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You don't get to miss me now." She inhaled sharply. "Rachel, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is," I cut her off. "It was always simple. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway." There was a beat of silence before she spoke again, her voice quieter. "I don't know how to fix this." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You can't." I wasn't sure if I meant it as an insult or just the truth. Either way, it was all I had left to say. I didn't wait for her response. I ended the call and set my phone down on the passenger seat, my hands still trembling. I had waited for that moment for weeks. I had imagined all the ways it would go, all the things I would say. And yet, now that it had happened, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. My mother stopped reaching out after that call, and for a while, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Maybe she had finally gotten the message. But then my aunt called. "Rachel, I need you to hear this from me before you see it somewhere else." I frowned. "What is it?" She hesitated. "Your mom and Jake, they got engaged." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "Engaged?" "You're lying." The words left my mouth before I could even think about them. "I wish I was," my aunt sighed. "It's all over social media. She's posting pictures of them, talking about how he's redeemed himself and how she never been happier." My stomach twisted. I knew she had chosen him, but there had still been some part of me, some stupid, childish part, that had hoped she would wake up and realize what she had done. But now she was marrying him. She wasn't just choosing him. She was cementing it. I opened Instagram and searched for her name, my fingers moving on autopilot. And there it was, post after post, picture after picture. Her smiling in his arms, her showing off a ring. Her standing beside the man she had chosen over her own children. The caption read, "Sometimes the universe gives you a second chance at love. I never thought I'd find happiness like this, but here we are. True love wins. Forever redemption blessed." I nearly threw my phone across the room. True love, redemption. Was she serious? I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her and demand answers, but I knew there was no point. She was gone. Maybe not in the physical sense, but the mother I had known, the mother I had loved. She was a ghost, and there was no bringing her back. The night after I saw my mother's engagement post, I barely slept. My mind refused to slow down, replaying every moment that had led to this. It was one thing for her to betray us. It was another thing entirely for her to flaunt it to the world like she was some kind of fairy tale heroine who had overcome the odds to find her, happily ever after. It made me sick. By morning, my anger had settled into something colder. Determination. If she wanted to pretend that everything was perfect, then fine, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite history without a fight. I met my dad for coffee that afternoon. He looked exhausted, more so than usual. He was trying to pretend he was okay, but I could tell that seeing her move on like this had gutted him. "I saw the post," I said, stirring my coffee absently. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, I did too. She's making him look like some kind of savior, like you were the bad guy, like we were the ones who wronged her." His jaw tightened. "I know." I hesitated before speaking again. "Dad, what if we stop letting her control the narrative? What if we finally talk about what really happened?" He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, no more silence. No more sitting back while she spreads lies. We tell our side of the story. We remind people who she really is." He exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "Rachel, I don't know. I don't want to start a war." "She already started one," I said. "We've been losing by default because we refuse to fight back." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do it the right way, no pettiness, just the truth." The next few days were a whirlwind. My father and I started reconnecting with family members we hadn't spoken to in a while. making sure they knew what had really happened. We didn't spread rumors, we didn't trash her name, we just told the truth. And the truth had power. The first crack in her illusion appeared when one of her closest friends, a woman she had known for over 20 years, commented on her engagement post. "I don't understand. After everything he did, after everything you swore you'd never forgive." The comment disappeared within an hour, but screenshots started circulating in our extended family's group chat. People were asking questions, doubting her story. And she must have felt it, because 2 days later, she reached out again. "Mom, Rachel, please stop this. We don't need to do this to each other." I stared at the message, my heartbeat steady. I wasn't the one who had done this. She had. "Me, then tell the truth. Stop lying to everyone. Stop pretending this is some kind of love story when we both know it's not." She didn't reply, but the next morning, I woke up to find that she had blocked me on social media. A final, silent admission of guilt. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won. But deep down, I also knew that this wasn't the end of it. Not even close. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no screaming matches, no desperate pleas for reconciliation. Just silence. After my mother blocked me on social media, I expected to feel rage, to feel some burning desire to reach out one last time, to demand she look me in the eye and admit what she had done. But all I felt was nothing. A strange, hollow emptiness that was both terrifying and freeing. She had cut the last thread that connected us, and now, for the first time, I could truly move on. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I focused on work, on school, on rebuilding my life without her shadow hanging over me. My dad and I talked more often about things that had nothing to do with her. For the first time in a long time, our conversations weren't centered around pain or betrayal. We talked about books, about fixing up the house, about plans for the future. And that future no longer included her. But moving on wasn't as simple as just cutting someone out of your life. There were moments when the grief hit unexpectedly, creeping in like an old injury that flared up when the weather changed. I would catch myself picking up my phone, about to send her a message, before remembering there was no point. I would hear a song that reminded me of childhood road trips with her and feel my throat tight. I would see a woman in a store who looked like her from behind and feel my stomach drop, only to realize it was just a stranger. It wasn't just about losing a mother. It was about losing the version of her I had always hoped she could be. One evening, I was at my dad's house, helping him clean out some old boxes in the attic. We were sorting through things neither of us had touched in years, old holiday decorations, childhood toys, forgotten family photos. Then, buried at the bottom of a dusty box, I found a stack of letters. They were from my mom, letters she had written to my dad years ago, back when they were still trying to fix things the first time she had betrayed him. I hesitated before opening one, the paper fragile in my hands. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I love our family. I want to be better." I swallowed hard. The words felt like a cruel joke now. I glanced at my dad, who was watching me carefully. "Do you want to keep them?" he asked. I thought about it. I thought about the woman who had written these letters, the woman who had once claimed she wanted redemption. I thought about the woman she had become, the one who had chosen Jake over us, who had rewritten history to make herself the victim. And then I shook my head. "No," I said quietly, "I don't need them." Without another word, I placed the letters into the trash bag and tied it shut. My dad exhaled, giving me a small nod of understanding. And just like that, we closed the last chapter. I didn't need an apology from her anymore. I didn't need closure. Because the truth was, closure didn't come from the person who hurt you. It came from accepting that they were never the person you needed them to be in the first place. And I had finally accepted that. She was gone, and I was free. Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.